The winter wind whipped through downtown as Mr. Johnson hurried from his luxury car toward his office building. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the sidewalk, while his custom suit kept him warm against the morning chill. At 45, he had everything money could buy: the penthouse apartment, the successful tech company, and more wealth than he could spend in a lifetime. But something was missing, a void he couldn't quite fill with all his millions. That morning started like any other, with his usual stop at the coffee shop in his building's lobby. The baristas always had his order ready: black coffee, no sugar. Just as he reached for the door, he noticed a young woman huddled in the corner, her clothes worn but clean, clutching a cardboard sign asking for help. Normally, he would have walked past. He had trained himself to ignore the homeless people who gathered near his building. His assistant always said, "You can't help everyone, sir." But something made him pause. Maybe it was her eyes, intelligent and familiar, somehow reminding him of someone from his past. Or perhaps it was the way she held herself, with a dignity that seemed out of place with her circumstances. The young woman looked up, and their eyes met. She couldn't have been more than 23, about the same age as— No, he pushed that thought away. That was a chapter of his life he had closed long ago. But he couldn't shake the nagging feeling as he looked at her face. There was something in the curve of her nose, the shape of her eyes, that tugged at his memories. "Sir," she said softly, her voice surprisingly well-spoken. "I hate to bother you, but could you spare anything, even just enough for a meal?" Instead of reaching for his wallet, Mr. Johnson found himself asking, "When was the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning," she replied honestly, not breaking eye contact. There was no self-pity in her voice, just simple truth. He glanced at his watch. His first meeting wasn't for another hour. "Come on," he heard himself say. "Let's get you some breakfast." The cafe across the street was warm and cozy, a place he'd never normally visit when he had a 5-star restaurant in his own building. But something told him this was where they needed to be. The young woman, who introduced herself as Joy, ordered modestly, just eggs and toast, though he encouraged her to get more. As they waited for their food, he noticed how she sat up straight, how she folded her napkin in her lap, small gestures that spoke of a proper upbringing. "How did you end up on the street?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Joy stirred her coffee slowly, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. "My mom passed away 2 years ago," she finally said. "Cancer. She was all I had. Medical bills took everything," and then she trailed off, shrugging slightly. Something in Mr. Johnson's chest tightened. 23 years ago, he had made a choice. His girlfriend had been pregnant, and he had chosen his career over a family. She had agreed to end the pregnancy, or at least, that's what he had believed. He had given her the money and never looked back, throwing himself into building his empire. As Joy spoke about her mother, little details kept jumping out at him. The way she gestured with her hands when she talked, the slight dimple that appeared when she gave a small smile, they were like looking in a mirror of the past. "Your mother," he said, his mouth suddenly dry. "What was her name?" Joy looked up, a flash of something, suspicion, perhaps, crossing her face. "Why do you want to know?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed, his assistant reminding him about the morning meeting. But for the first time in his successful career, the meeting seemed completely unimportant. He had a feeling his life was about to change forever, and this time he wasn't going to walk away. "I think," he said carefully, "I might have known her." A long time ago. After that first meeting with Joy, Mr. Johnson couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the city lights below, a glass of water untouched beside him. His mind kept wandering back 23 years, to a time when he was just a struggling college student with big dreams and empty pockets. He remembered that small campus coffee shop where he used to meet his girlfriend. They were both young, ambitious, and so in love. He could still picture her beautiful face, how her eyes lit up when she talked about their future together. But then came the news that changed everything. She was pregnant. Back then, his only focus had been becoming successful. He had nothing to offer a child, he told himself. No money, no stability, not even a proper job. When she told him about the pregnancy, he had panicked. All he could see were his dreams slipping away. They had talked for hours, tears flowing, voices breaking. Finally, she had agreed to end the pregnancy, or so he thought. He walked over to his home office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was an old photo album he hadn't looked at in years. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages, stopping at a picture from his college days. There she was, his girlfriend, smiling at the camera, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach. The date on the photo made his heart skip, exactly 9 months before Joy's birth. "I gave her the money," he whispered to the empty room. "She said she would take care of it." But had she? The more he thought about Joy's features, the more he saw the resemblance. The way she held her chin when she was thinking, just like he did. The slight crease between her eyebrows when she was worried. He saw that same expression every morning in his mirror. His phone rang, breaking the silence. It was his assistant reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. He had built his tech company from nothing, turning it into a multi-million-dollar empire. People called him a genius, a self-made success story. But sitting there, looking at that old photo, he felt like the biggest fool in the world. What if his girlfriend had changed her mind? What if she had chosen to keep the baby, to raise their child alone? He had never checked on her after giving her the money. Too focused on his future, he had moved to a different city, changed his phone number, cut all ties to his past. He opened his laptop and started searching. Social media, public records, anything he could find. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he typed her name. Hours passed as he dug deeper into the past he had tried so hard to forget. There it was, a small obituary from 2 years ago. Cancer, just like Joy had said. His throat tightened as he read about the loving mother she had been, how she had raised her daughter alone. The dates matched perfectly. Everything matched. The sun was rising when he finally stepped onto his balcony, the morning air crisp against his face. He had spent the whole night piecing together a puzzle he never knew existed. All these years, he had told himself that choosing his career was the right decision. He had convinced himself that the sacrifice was worth it. Now, looking at his empty mansion, his success felt hollow. His phone buzzed again, another reminder about the board meeting. But for the first time in 23 years, business wasn't the most important thing on his mind. Somewhere out there was a young woman who might be his daughter, sleeping on cold streets while he lived in luxury. He picked up his phone, not to check his emails or stock prices, but to find out where homeless people in the area usually went for breakfast. He had a lot of questions to ask, and even more to make up for. This time, he wasn't going to let fear of the truth stop him. The small diner buzzed with morning activity as Mr. Johnson sat across from Joy again. He had found her at the same spot near his building, and this time she seemed less hesitant to accept his offer of breakfast. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes, evidence of another night spent in the cold. "You look like you want to ask me something," Joy said, cutting into her pancakes. She had ordered more food this time, perhaps feeling more comfortable with him. "You keep staring at me like you're trying to solve a puzzle." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, feeling its warmth. "Tell me about your mother," he said softly. "What was she like?" Joy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, and a small smile touched her lips. "She was amazing," she said. "Worked 2 jobs most of my life, but she never complained. She always made time to help me with homework, to come to my school events. Even when things were tight, she made sure I never felt poor." "And your father?" he asked, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Her face hardened slightly. "Never met him. Mom said he wasn't ready for a family. Chose his career instead." She shrugged, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. She never said anything bad about him, though, just that he had different dreams. Mr. Johnson's hands began to shake. He set his coffee cup down carefully. "Your mother? Was she a teacher? Did she love taking photos?" Joy's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" He pulled out his phone and opened the photo he had found last night, the one from his college days. He turned it toward her. "Because I knew your mother, 23 years ago." Joy's face went pale as she stared at the photo. He could see her processing everything, the timing, the similarities, the way he had been looking at her. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not. You can't be." "I thought she had ended the pregnancy," he said, his voice cracking. "She told me she would. I gave her money for it, and I never checked. I never knew." Joy pushed her plate away and stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several diners turned to look. "You're lying," she said, but her voice trembled. "My mother would have told me if she'd found you." "She tried," he admitted. "I found her old letters last night. She wrote to me at my old address, but I had already moved. I changed my number, my email. I was so focused on becoming successful, I cut off everyone from my past." Tears were rolling down Joy's cheeks now. "Do you know what she went through? How hard she worked? She put herself through night school while raising me. She never bought herself new clothes, so I could have what I needed for school. And you've been living in that fancy building all this time." Her words hit him like physical blows. Each one revealed another layer of his failure, another year of hardship he could have prevented. "I can't change the past," he said, standing up slowly. "But I want to make it right. I can help you now." "I don't want your money," Joy spat, but her voice broke on the last word. "I don't just want to give you money," he said quietly. "I want to know you. I want to hear about every birthday I missed, every school play, every scraped knee. I want to know about your mother's last days to share your grief. I want to be your father, if you'll let me." Joy stood there, tears still falling, looking so much like her mother that it took his breath away. The whole diner had gone quiet, watching their drama unfold. Finally, she whispered, "Why should I trust you? How do I know you won't disappear again?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Because I already took a DNA test. I've been carrying the results with me, hoping I'd find you again. You don't have to open it now, but when you're ready, it's proof that I'm not going anywhere this time." Joy stared at the envelope, then back at the photo of her mother, young and hopeful, not knowing how her life would change. The breakfast crowd had returned to their meals, but this small moment between father and daughter hung suspended in time, waiting for her next words. A week had passed since the DNA test results confirmed what Mr. Johnson already knew in his heart. He sat in his office, unable to focus on work, thinking about Joy. She had taken the envelope that day in the diner, but hadn't contacted him for 3 days after reading it. When she finally called, her voice was shaky but determined. Now, he found himself doing something he'd never done before, leaving work in the middle of the day. His assistant's surprised face when he cancelled his afternoon meetings told him how much he had changed in just a week. He headed to the small coffee shop where Joy had agreed to meet him. She was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner table, her backpack, containing everything she owned, beside her. She looked different today, more guarded than their previous meetings. The DNA results lay on the table between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. "I have questions," she said as he sat down. "Lots of them." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup, a gesture so like her mother's that it made his chest tight. "Ask me anything," he replied, leaving his own coffee untouched. "Did you ever think about us? Even once in all these years?" The question hit him hard. He could have lied, said he thought about them every day, but he owed her the truth. "I buried those thoughts," he admitted. "Convinced myself I'd made the right choice." "That your mother had." He paused, the words bitter in his mouth. "That there was no baby to think about." Joy's face tightened, but she nodded slightly, accepting his honesty even if it hurt. "Mom kept a box," she said quietly. "Letters she wrote to you but couldn't send. Pictures of me growing up. She always said, one day he might want to know." His hands gripped the edge of the table. Can I see them?" "They're in storage. When we lost the house after her medical bills," she stopped, composing herself. "I couldn't leave them behind. They're all I have left of her." "Let's go get them," he said immediately. "Right now." She looked surprised. "Don't you have work?" "Nothing more important than this." The storage unit was small, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. Joy's hands trembled as she unlocked it, revealing neat stacks of boxes. She knew exactly which one she wanted. A blue container marked letters in careful handwriting. They sat on the concrete floor together, the box between them. One by one, Joy pulled out envelopes, each dated and sealed. "She wrote to you every year on my birthday," she explained. Said it helped her feel like you were still connected to us somehow. Mr. Johnson opened the first letter with shaking hands. Her mother's handwriting was just as he remembered, neat and hopeful. "Dear love," it began. "Our daughter smiled today for the first time." Tears fell onto the paper before he realized he was crying. Each letter revealed another year he had missed, first steps, first words, school plays, scraped knees, and childhood dreams. Through her mother's words, he watched Joy grow up, saw the sacrifices made, the love given, the hope that never quite died. She never stopped believing you'd come back, Joy said softly, watching him read. Even when I was angry about not having a father, she'd say, sometimes people need time to grow into who they're meant to be. He looked up at his daughter, seeing in her face all the years he had lost, all the moments he could never get back. I can't change the past, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I want to be here now, not just with money or things, but really here. As your father. Joy picked up another letter, this one from her high school graduation. Mom would have liked that, she said quietly. She always said everyone deserves a second chance at love. They sat there among the boxes of memories, father and daughter, beginning the slow process of building a bridge across 23 years of absence. Outside, the city rushed by, but in that small storage unit, time seemed to stand still, giving them space to find their way back to each other. The city lights sparkled outside the window of Mr. Johnson's penthouse as he prepared dinner. It had been 2 weeks since they found the letters, and tonight was the first time Joy had agreed to visit his home. He wanted everything to be perfect, so he was cooking himself, no fancy catering, just simple home cooking like he remembered from his own childhood. The doorbell rang, and he wiped his hands nervously on his apron. When he opened the door, Joy stood there, clean and well-dressed in new clothes, but still clutching her old backpack like a safety blanket. He had offered her a place to stay, but she had insisted on keeping her independence, accepting only his help to get a small apartment nearby. Something smells good, she said, stepping inside hesitantly. Her eyes widened as she took in the view. Wow. This is different from my cardboard box under the bridge. He noticed how she used humor to hide her discomfort. I was thinking we could eat on the balcony, he said, trying to make her feel more at ease. It's less formal than the dining room. She followed him to the kitchen, where pots bubbled on the stove. What are you making? Your grandmother's recipe, he said softly. One of the few things I remember from before everything. My mother's special stew. I thought maybe we could start our own traditions with some old ones. Joy's face softened at the mention of family she had never known. Tell me about her, my grandmother. As they worked together to finish dinner, Joy chopping vegetables while he stirred the stew, he shared stories about his mother, who had passed away while Joy was still a baby. She would have loved you, he said. She always wanted a granddaughter. Out on the balcony, under the stars, they sat down to eat. Joy took her first spoonful of stew and closed her eyes. This is real food, she said, not like those fancy restaurants you probably go to. I've had enough fancy meals alone, he replied. This is better. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Joy spoke again. I opened another letter today, she said quietly. From when I was 16. Mom wrote about my first heartbreak. This boy stood me up at a school dance, and Joy's voice cracked. She spent her whole paycheck to buy me a new dress and took me out dancing herself. Said I should never let anyone make me feel less than wonderful. Mr. Johnson set down his spoon, his appetite gone. She was an amazing mother. She was, Joy agreed, then added softly, she would have forgiven you, you know, she already had in her letters. But I'm still learning to trust me, he finished. I understand. Take all the time you need. After dinner, Joy wandered around the apartment, looking at his life through the pictures on his walls. She stopped at one of him receiving an award. Must be nice, she said, having everything you ever wanted. He stood beside her, looking at his younger self. I thought it was everything. But standing in that storage unit, reading those letters, I realized I had nothing that really mattered. Joy turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. I found a job today, she said suddenly. A real one, at a bookstore. The owner didn't care that I was homeless. Said she could tell I was a reader by how I handled the books. Pride swelled in his chest, not the kind he felt when closing big deals, but something deeper, purer. That's wonderful, he said, then hesitated before adding, you know you don't have to. I want to, she cut him off. I need to do this my way, just like Mom would have wanted. As they said goodbye that night, she surprised him with a quick, awkward hug, their first. It lasted only a moment, but it felt like a beginning. After she left, he stood on the balcony, looking at the city that had once seemed like it belonged to him. Now he knew better. All the wealth in the world couldn't compare to that simple hug from his daughter. On his phone, he pulled up a photo of the last letter they had read together. "You did it," he whispered to her mother's handwriting. "You raised an amazing daughter. I promise I'll try to be worthy of her." 1 month into their new relationship, Mr. Johnson walked into the small bookstore where Joy worked. He hadn't told her he was coming. He just wanted to see her in her element. Through the window, he watched her arranging books on a shelf, smiling as she helped customers find what they needed. She looked different now, more confident, standing taller. The bell chimed as he entered, and Joy looked up. For a moment, he saw surprise flash across her face, followed by something that looked almost like happiness. She was getting better at not hiding her feelings from him. "I'm on break in 5 minutes," she said, finishing up with a customer. "You can look around if you want." He wandered through the shelves, picking up a children's book, the kind he should have read to her when she was little. When Joy joined him, she noticed what he was holding and gave a small smile. "Mom used to read to me every night," she said, taking the book from him. Even after working double shifts, she never skipped it. Said stories were like little pieces of magic. They walked to a nearby park, settling on a bench with coffee from the local cart. Fall leaves danced around their feet as they sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Joy spoke. "I went back to the storage unit yesterday," she said, "found my old report cards. Mom kept every single one." She pulled out a folded paper from her jacket. "Look at this one, first grade. The teacher wrote that I was good at helping other kids who were struggling." His chest tightened as he looked at the yellowed paper, another piece of his daughter's life he was just discovering. "You still do that," he said. "I saw you with that lost-looking customer just now. You're patient, just like your mother." Joy's hands twisted in her lap. "Speaking of helping people, I've been thinking about something." She took a deep breath. "I want to go back to school. Not just for me, but there are so many people out there like I was. Homeless, but not hopeless. They just need a chance." Pride swelled in his chest. "Whatever you need," he started, but she held up her hand. "I want to do this my own way," she said firmly. "I'll take loans if I have to." But she hesitated, then continued, "Maybe you could help me with the application process? I haven't been in school for a while." "Of course," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Anything you need." Later that evening, they sat in his home office, surrounded by college brochures and applications. Joy had stepped away to take a phone call, and he found himself looking at her mother's picture on his desk, one they'd found in the storage unit. He still couldn't believe how much time he'd wasted, how many moments he'd missed. "That was my boss," Joy said, returning. "She offered me more hours, said I'm good with the customers." She paused, looking at the photo he was holding. "You miss her too now, don't you?" "Every day," he admitted. "The more I learn about her through you, the more I realize what an incredible person she was." Joy sat down heavily in the chair across from him. "I found her diary," she said quietly, "from when she was sick. Want to know what she wrote about you?" She didn't wait for his answer. "She wrote that she hoped you'd found happiness, whatever path you chose. That's the kind of person she was." Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't deserve her forgiveness." "No," Joy agreed, but she gave it anyway. And now, she took a deep breath. "I think I'm starting to understand why. Holding on to anger just makes your heart heavy. She taught me that." They worked late into the night on her applications, sharing stories between essays. Joy told him about her dreams of becoming a social worker, of helping other homeless youth find their way. He listened, his heart full of a pride he'd never known in all his years of business success. As she was leaving, Joy turned back. "Dad," she said, testing out the word for the first time. "Thank you. Not for the money or the help, but for trying, for wanting to know me." That single word, Dad, meant more to him than all his business awards combined. He watched her walk away, realizing that true wealth had nothing to do with money. It was measured in moments like these, in second chances, and in the courage to accept them. The small apartment Joy now called home was filled with evening sunlight as she and her father sat on the floor, surrounded by old boxes from the storage unit. In her hands was a warm leather journal, her mother's private thoughts during her final years. She'd been hesitant to read it before, but something told her it was time. "Are you sure you want me here for this?" Mr. Johnson asked softly. The past 2 months had taught him to respect his daughter's boundaries, to let her set the pace of their relationship. Joy nodded, running her fingers over the journal's cover. "Mom would have wanted this," she said. "Besides, there might be things in here you need to hear too." Opening to the first page, Joy began to read aloud. "Today, I told my daughter she's the best thing that ever happened to me. She thinks it's just something mothers say, but she doesn't understand. Choosing to have her was the bravest thing I ever did, and I've never regretted it for a single moment." Mr. Johnson's hands clenched in his lap. Joy continued reading. "Sometimes I see him in her. The way she furrows her brow when she's thinking hard, how she stands up straight when she's nervous. I wonder if he ever became the success he dreamed of. I hope he found what he was looking for." They spent hours going through the journal, learning about her mother's quiet strength, her hidden fears, her unwavering love. She wrote about working late shifts while studying for her teaching degree, about counting pennies to buy Joy's school supplies, about dancing in their tiny kitchen when things got tough. "Listen to this," Joy said, her voice catching. "I never told my daughter that her father gave me money for an abortion. How do you explain to a child that someone would choose money over love? Instead, I taught her that sometimes people aren't ready for the gifts life gives them. Maybe someday he'll be ready to know what he missed." Mr. Johnson stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders shook as he tried to contain his emotions. "She never used the money," he said quietly. "I found out she put it in a college fund for you instead." Joy wiped her eyes, turning another page. "There's more," she said. "This is from when she got sick. The hardest part isn't leaving this world, it's leaving my daughter alone in it. But I've taught her everything I know about love, forgiveness, and strength. She'll find her way, and maybe someday she'll find her father too. I hope he's become someone who deserves her." Standing up, Joy walked to where her father stood. "She wrote about you until the end," she said softly. "Not with anger or blame, but with hope. Hope that someday we'd find each other." He turned to face her, tears streaming down his face. "I spent 23 years chasing success," he said. "Building companies, making millions, thinking that's what would make me happy. But your mother, she had real success. She raised you with love and courage. She was richer than I'll ever be." Joy opened the journal to the last entry, dated just days before her mother passed away. "My dearest daughter," she read, her voice trembling. "When you read this, I'll be gone. But remember, every story has more chapters than we can see. Your father's chapter in our life seemed to end, but maybe that wasn't the whole story. Keep your heart open to new beginnings." Together, they sat on Joy's small couch, the journal between them. Outside, the city was getting ready for night, lights twinkling on one by one. "You know what's strange?" Joy said after a while. "Reading these journals, seeing how Mom never gave up hope, it helps me understand both of you better. She chose love. You chose fear. But she always believed there was room for both stories to change." Mr. Johnson picked up a photo that had fallen from the journal. Joy's mother at her college graduation, holding a young Joy in her arms. "She was the true success story," he said. "I just wish I had realized it sooner." "Mom used to say it's never too late to learn life's most important lessons," Joy replied, resting her head on his shoulder for the first time. "I think she'd be happy to know we're learning them together now." They sat there as darkness fell, two people brought together by one woman's endless capacity for love and forgiveness. The journal lay in their laps, a bridge between past and present, pain and healing, loss and new beginnings. 3 months had passed since they first met, and Mr. Johnson found himself doing something he'd never done before, sitting in the back of a community center, watching his daughter give a speech. Joy stood at the podium, her voice strong as she addressed a room full of homeless youth and social workers. "6 months ago, I was sleeping under a bridge," she began, her words catching everyone's attention. "I thought my story was over. But life has a way of surprising you. Today, I'm here to tell you that your story isn't over either." From his seat, he watched as she shared her journey, not just the happy ending, but the hard parts too. The nights spent hungry, the fear, the loneliness. She talked about her mother's struggle, about forgiveness, about finding family in unexpected places. "Change doesn't always come the way you expect," she told her audience. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger who stops to really see you. Sometimes it comes when you're brave enough to let go of anger and accept love, even if it comes 23 years late. After her speech, young people lined up to talk to her. Mr. Johnson watched as she listened to each one, giving them the same attention she perceived that first morning at the coffee shop. She didn't just offer them hope, she offered understanding. Later that evening, as they walked through the city park, Joy seemed lost in thought. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about what Mom wrote in her journal, about using your money for my college fund." He nodded, remembering those words that had shamed and humbled him. "Well," Joy continued, "I want to do something similar. I want to use my story to help others." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I have this idea for a foundation, not just giving money to homeless people, but really helping them, education, job training, mental health support. All the things Mom did for me, but for people who don't have a mom like mine." Pride swelled in his chest. "Whatever you need," he started, but she cut him off with a smile. I know. But this time, I want us to do it together. Your business knowledge, my experience, we could really make a difference." That night, they sat in his office, planning not another business venture, but a mission. Joy's ideas flowed freely: programs for homeless youth, support for single parents, emergency housing that felt like home. Her mother's spirit was alive in every suggestion. "We'll call it the bridge," Joy said, scribbling notes. "Because that's what people need sometimes, just a bridge to get from where they are to where they could be." As they worked, Mr. Johnson noticed something different about his office. Once a space dedicated to making money, it now felt alive with purpose. Photos of Joy and her mother had joined his business awards. Her college acceptance letter, she'd gotten into the social work program, hung proudly on the wall. "You know what's funny?" Joy said, looking up from her notes. "All those years I was angry at you for choosing success over family. But now I see that true success is what we're building here, together." He reached for the last photo they'd found in her mother's journal. It showed Joy at her high school graduation, her mother's arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling despite their struggles. "Your mother knew what real success looked like," he said softly. "She just had to wait for me to figure it out too." Joy stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. She used to say that every star in the sky was a dream waiting to come true. I never really understood that until now. They worked late into the night, father and daughter, turning their shared pain into purpose. The foundation wouldn't just be another charity, it would be their way of honoring her mother's legacy, of turning their second chance into first chances for others. As Joy finally gathered her things to leave, she hugged him, no longer awkward, but warm and real. "Mom would be proud," she whispered, "not just of the foundation, but of us, of how we found our way back to being a family." He held his daughter tight, thinking about how much his definition of wealth had changed. Success wasn't in his bank account or his company's stock price. It was right here, in this embrace, in this chance to finally be the father he should have been all along. 1 year had passed since that first morning when Mr. Johnson had stopped to help a homeless young woman outside his building. Now he stood proudly watching Joy receive her certificate from her first semester of social work school. She'd insisted on taking evening classes while working at the bookstore during the day, determined to make her own way just like her mother had. After the ceremony, they visited her mother's grave together. It was a beautiful spring day, with flowers blooming all around the peaceful cemetery. Joy knelt down and placed fresh flowers by the headstone, then stepped back to stand beside her father. "I brought something," she said, pulling out a one envelope from her bag. "It's the last letter Mom wrote to you. I've been saving it for the right moment." His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was dated just a week before she passed away. "My dear love, if you're reading this, it means our daughter found you. It means the dreams I had for both of you finally came true. I never stopped believing that someday you'd be ready to be the father she deserves. Love isn't about perfect timing, it's about perfect hearts finding their way to each other, even if it takes years. Take care of our girl. She has your determination and my heart. Together, that makes her unstoppable." Mr. Johnson wiped his eyes as Joy took his hand. "She was right about you," he said softly. "Unstoppable is exactly what you are." They walked back to the car, where a stack of papers sat on the back seat. applications for their foundation's first round of scholarships. The Bridge Foundation had already helped 20 homeless young people find housing and start college courses. "Remember that girl who came to my speech 3 months ago?" Joy asked as they drove. "The one who reminded me of myself? She just got accepted to nursing school. Our foundation is paying for her books and supplies." He smiled, remembering how far they'd both come. His office building looked different now. The lobby had been converted into a welcome center for the Bridge Foundation, where people could come for help without feeling ashamed. His business skills had found a new purpose, turning profits into possibilities for others. That evening, they had dinner at Joy's apartment. She'd made her mother's special recipe, the one they'd found written in the margins of her journal. As they ate, Joy shared her plans for expanding the foundation's reach. "I want to open a shelter," she said, her eyes bright with purpose. "Not just beds and meals, but a real home. With a library like the bookstore where I work, computers for job searches, and classrooms for studying. We'll call it Mom's Place." Mr. Johnson reached into his briefcase and pulled out some papers. "I think I found the perfect building," he said. "It needs work," but he stopped as Joy started laughing. "What's funny?" he asked. "A year ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, angry at the world. Now I'm planning to build bridges for others. Mom would love the poetry in that." Later, as they stood on her small balcony looking at the stars, Joy pulled out her mother's journal one last time. "Listen to this," she said, turning to the very last page. She wrote this the night before she passed away. "Life is a story of second chances. Sometimes the happy ending takes longer than we expect, but that just makes it sweeter when it comes." Mr. Johnson looked at his daughter, no longer the desperate young woman from the street, but a strong, passionate person who carried her mother's spirit and his determination. He'd spent years building a business empire, but his greatest achievement was standing right beside him. "Mom was right," Joy said softly, closing the journal. "About second chances, about forgiveness, about love finding its way. She knew our story wasn't over." "No," he agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders. "It was just beginning." Together, father and daughter stood under the same stars her mother had wished upon all those years ago. Their story had taken an unexpected path, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be, not just to each other, but to a purpose bigger than themselves. Through their foundation, her mother's love would continue to change lives, building bridges for others to find their way home.